through the last 3 months, the world is still watching the destruction, continuous construction in Gaza Strip because of the besiege that started in 7th October of 2023, and the siege that the Strip witnessed for 13 years. Of course, we know that the destruction is actually in all aspects of life. About 13,000 of civilians were killed in Gaza. Most of them were women and children. War is still going on till these moments when we are now talking. We've witnessed that learners in Gaza Strip, they witnessed actually how their houses, schools were destroyed, and some of them were killed. They witnessed the death of some family members and their colleagues in school, and they witnessed the destruction of the schools and how these schools that they used to go to every day became debris. They saw how their colleagues were running away, carrying their backpacks. Instead of carrying books and notebooks, they carried whatever they managed to carry to go to shelters, to collective shelters. Hoping that one day, hopefully soon, would go back to their schools. Iman, of 5 years old, who joined recently the kindergarten, she spent there only 2 months before the war, and she was killed with her family in Gaza Strip at the beginning of war. We witnessed the children acting like old people because they were deprived of education, and they are traumatized because of what they are seeing there, because of losing the right to education. Maybe their schools, especially schools with the flag of UN, became shelters that host thousands of Palestinians. It is unprecedented war that Gaza's witnessing because it targets education facilities directly. It's estimated that more than 60% of education installations were destroyed. Schools, universities, and colleges, learners, teachers, and even staff were not safe since the beginning of this war in 7th of October. While thousands of them were victims, either dead or injured. This educational year from the Ministry of Education, because of destruction witnessed by Gaza, suspended, while thousands of children deprived of their education to right because of the going on war. And this deprivation is one of the violations of the human rights. As the General Commissioner of UNRWA, Philips Mazzarini, said that the education is suspended completely because of war, and the organization is afraid that the children might lose another academic year, in addition to the 2 years lost because of the corona pandemic. So again, you are all welcome to this webinar organized by the INE. Can we move to the next slide, please? The aim of this webinar is to shed light on the challenges, the current challenges faced by teachers in Gaza Strip. And our another goal is to advocate the international attention to those people who are affected by war, especially in Gaza Strip, and we will discuss with the presenters about recommendations and actionable steps to protect education institutions, learners, and teachers in afflicted areas. Next, please. I'd like to thank our presenters for giving us their time. And to shed light on these points that I just mentioned, today we have 4 speakers. Every presenter would take 15 minutes. Just quickly, we would have a recorded message from Dr. Saeed Abu Aita from Gaza Strip. He's currently in Gaza Strip, and he insisted on sending this recorded message to us from Gaza, from the suffering. And Hiyam Al Hayek, our colleague, who is a member in the INE in Gaza Strip, and she managed to flee Gaza during the war after 1 month or 1 month and a half of the war. And she's an activist, a civilian activist, and she works for 2 decades on different topics regarding education in Gaza. And she was the head of the Al Qattan Institute, and which was working in Gaza. And after that, we would listen to UNRWA from Frost the Beat. She is a senior counselor, a specialist in UNRWA education program. After that, we would listen to Apolline Montoya. She is the counselor of advocacy and policies in the GCP. Uh, and last but not least, we would listen to Fadi Baydoun, the coordinator of education cluster in Palestine. But before we start, I'd like to invite Dean Brooke, the head of the INE, to give us the keynote speech of this webinar. The mic is yours, Dean. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayman, and thank you to all of our members really across the globe. I was reading your where you're calling in from, and it's impressive. We all care about this issue, clearly. So today's webinar has been organized to really learn from our members, partners, and colleagues working to uphold the right to education in the context of the Gaza crisis. As Ayman clearly shared, INE's mission is to ensure the right to a quality, safe, and relevant education for all who live in emergency and crisis contexts through prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery. And today, we will hear and learn further on how the right to education that is also protective can be upheld. The INE Secretariat continues to follow up, and they are in touch, as you've seen, with members in Gaza and across the region. And we're working hard on the curation and sharing of resources and good practice guidance to support our members on their response and as they prepare to respond. We are also organizing and working on follow-up webinars. We're in touch with a number of our members who have developed specific resources, and we will share information on those upcoming webinars in the new year. As I hand back to our facilitator, the very capable Ayman Qadar, and our esteemed presenters, I just want to express my sincere thank you and gratitude to them, not only for their commitment and dedication to this work, but taking time out to talk with all of us today. So thank you very much, and back to you, Ayman.
And now we would move to listen to recorded a message from Dr. Saeed Abu Aita from Gaza Strip, who describes the destruction in Gaza concerning the education facilities, and he's raising vital and important questions about the future of education in Gaza. And we will discuss this later. Asim, would you please play the message? Thank you. Awesome, we can't hear the record.
Are you going to play him? All right. Okay.
لا يوجد صوت. أعتقد بأنه لا يوجد
I'm not able to. Can we continue and perhaps in the meantime we'll sort the issue? We can go to our next presenter if that's okay.
We are sorry for this technical problem. So let's move on to the next speaker and we will get back. We will try again to listen to the recorded message from Dr. Saeed later. Now I'd like to ask Hiam, the colleague Hiam Al-Hayek from Gaza Strip to talk to us. Hiam, the mic is yours for 15 minutes. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me. I wish that we would have this webinar in a different time, but the situation we have today, education topic, having such a webinar in such a time, talking about education, especially in Gaza. And you know that Gaza is suffering from a fierce war today to preserve their land's identity and people. This is something really great. Generally, under war and conflict, the priorities are different. You know, basics come first, then education. So we are caring about safety, about food, having safe places for people. Sometimes we fear, as people who care about education, that education would be ignored or would be forgotten because, you know, the priorities are different about providing basic needs, securing and so those people from death. But, you know, education is as important as life. So we should keep this in mind as the efforts are going toward shelter and saving lives. We have to exert efforts toward education because it is valuable, especially for us as Palestinians. Next slide, please. Why I say, especially for us as Palestinians, before I can to say I'm Al-Qattan a daughter, I worked for the institution of Al-Qattan Al-Qattan. Our mission and our vision was, and our goal was, Abdul Muhsin Al-Qattan used to say that after Nakba, after we lost everything, our people has only one option, which is to raise again through education and knowledge. We are keen on education and knowledge because we know that we have only education. We lost everything but not education. I'm one of people who got married at the age of 17, but education was my obsession. I got back to school. I finished my university. I finished my MA, and I'm now doing my PhD. So there is nothing that stops us from education because this is our destiny. We lost everything. We only have education. So we also say that Gaza or Palestine is the lowest rate of illiteracy, despite the fact that we are besieged in a very small area. Not only this, but I know many people they started their educational life late, but they achieved a lot. That's why education is a very important and sacred message, and it is very important for us as Palestinians. That's why I say that the rates are very high about people who are joining education path. And here I want to raise a question mark. Despite the fact that the best educators are Palestinians, and they have high positions in Palestine. And even if I talk about the quality of education, I want to put a question mark, not because we are not able to give good quality of education, not because we don't have qualified people. Actually, we are besieged people. We uh, we are getting education under very hard circumstances. We have a training courses, for example, and we can't, these courses can't be updated. We can't catch the path of the international courses around the world. This is because of the besiege, but this can't stop us, you know. Nothing can stop us from continuing our education path and from working. Actually, through getting education, we got the concepts. The world now is trying to market some concepts. In Gaza, we work hard to work on similar concepts with our learners. For example, Spark that I used to work with, they had the first Fab Lab, but so today we are keen on catching up all the advances that all the advances the world is witnessing. We are trying to teach our students and trying to get the most developed technologies to give a good evidence and a good example of education to Palestine. Next slide, please. When we talk about our right to education, yes, and I'm not going to mention numbers and statistics. Why shall I mention these numbers and statistics? To explain how much we are losing children and the number of victims. Why? Because, for example, when I wanted to prepare my presentation, the number of martyrs were 18,000. Now, today it is 20,000. At that day, it was 3,000 children. Today, it's more than 6,000. And of course, these numbers are increasing. You know, education is a political right, and we are not going to stop, not for a moment to stop trying our best to get our children and learners to get this right. For me, I left Gaza after more than a month of the war. You know, Gaza, it was in the beginning of the war. Today, when I look at Gaza, I find nothing. People used to flee and go to the schools. Today, they can't find a safer place. Today, when I see Gaza images, there is nothing in Gaza. But as I can say, as we the motto of Gaza is that bird which is always rose from the ashes. So we always rose again, and we do our best to restore all Gaza and to restore our life. And I hope that this wouldn't be very far. Next slide, please. Okay, when I want to talk about schools in Gaza, as I said, I don't want to talk and to discuss statistics and numbers. I don't want to mention the number of schools that were destroyed, but you know that schools now shelter thousands of children. The number of children who were martyred, it shows how many children, and it's despite, instead of going to school to plan for their future, now they go to school or to tent actually to protect their lives. Even the schools that they go to, they don't feel safe. I know that the UNRWA is doing their best. The international parties are doing, they are trying, but we send coordinations and UNRWA is giving coordinations of the schools, of shelters, of safe places that people might be there. But nothing. Attacks targeting all schools. There are no schools, no safe places, no safety, no education. Next slide, please. I'm not going to mention the number of destroyed school because even the statistic, I have it from the Education of Ministry in 11th December. But today the numbers are increasing. The 220, they became 240.
All these statistics have changed. And that's why I will say that maybe there was 35,000 students who used to be in the first grade. And do you know the first grade? This means how much they attend. They did not attend anything. Just 1 month. They didn't finish a month. 35,000 now are becoming ignorant. They did not take the ABC. That's why we need to work a lot on these people. To work when UNRWA, for example, or any other side would like, for example, to do a plan for them. What are we going to start with these students? And on which what are the priorities, especially that this year we don't have education. Next year we will be starting, and then you have the 2 years of Corona as any other country. We yes, we had problem of COVID, but we did not have the structures to support this. We went to the electronic education. We created platforms that the mothers used to help the students with the homework. The mothers used to say, I'm going to be working on the homework. Are we going back to this? When we are going to look at the solutions, do we say this is going to be towards the end? Let's go deeper, because we already tried the distance learning through Corona. We know just how much illiteracy we had. A program for those students. We need to have a program to address the leakage, and now we have a new war, and means that we are losing years of efforts. So why? Because even the ones in schools today, the question is. Are they thinking about education now? Everything has changed. No, their future is different. Uh, with one strike, 7th October had changed the life of so many people. 7th October needs, there are so many consequences we need to work on to amend what had happened, especially when you talk about education. Next. As we have agreed that we will not talk about the students, however, our numbers, like, I want to talk about Yusuf. His mother used to say, where is my mother who has a curly hair? He was first grader. His grandmother was saying in one of the interviews, Yusuf came and he said, now I am in the first year in school. He's one of hundreds of students. How many 35 of those 35,000 students go for the first time to education? How many dreams have been lost? When you say 35,000 have, we have Also 31,000 at the secondary last year, to which the whole family is waiting for the results of the certificate to go to the university. Or people want to be lawyers, doctors. Those are dreams. The war had ended. Why? Because today the education is not the priority. The families today are looking for how to find a shelter, food, etc. So the families today are thinking about other things. No, I wouldn't say dreams. Yeah, every child, every family need their children to go to school. They want their children to be the best. However, today we cannot even afford to dream. Our children might not dream about what is going to happen in the future. They once asked a child, "What do you dream of?" He says, "I don't dream of anything because I know that I will die soon. Our dreams die while we are still young." This is the reality of our children, the education. This is the reality of Gaza. It's a misery. All of us are outside of the educational system. There's no education today. Next slide. I might start to maybe someone would speak from the UNRWA about who's part of this. However, yes, there are so many local efforts on the local level, international level as well, who took into consideration this issue of, let's say, to save what we can save in regard to education, to help even the students in the camps, in tents, in schools, so that they can overcome this crisis. The education cluster was one of the bodies who have worked on this and have exerted a big effort in this regard. Baha Shatali was present as well. It's great that we see such organizations still working despite the bombardment, despite of the instability of the situation. So many providers of service have been bombarded themselves, have sacrificed their lives for the education. The teacher at the American school sports, he could stay in the tent of the shelter. He went to the school. Why? To do some recreational activities for the children, and he was martyred because of the bombardment. You might want to volunteer. Nonetheless, now there is a problem because the teacher is killed, the journalist is killed. 200 teachers have been, or 209, I think, or 10. The number is large. The bombardment is large. And the people are interested in education, even if you're talking about voluntarily individual efforts to save this process. However, the situation is very dire. I was keen in my presentation not to put any photos because we don't want the photos. Everyone sees those around. Our schools are demolished. If you leave a school, another school is demolished. Some people hate. We have been displaced 4 or 5 times in this house that we have been bombarded, and then some people would say we have escaped the rebels of our house or the house we are staying at for 3 or 4 times. It's difficult now to talk about education. Here you're talking about the system of a whole country which is being demolished. Next slide. Wounded, no martyrs, nothing. We will not talk about them because our martyrs are increasing daily, 200, 300 daily. Sometimes they reach 500 and 600 in numbers. That's why let's skip the numbers because I think everyone follows these and you know about them. Maybe other parties would be talking about this in specific. Now let me just concentrate on how much we need education, that the reality of education today is at a crisis. We are at a crisis, not just education, the whole life there. That's why my point of view is that it's a good to have a currently educational effort. However, as well, it's important to think about tomorrow. What are we going to do next? Because hopefully, we hope that this crisis is going to end soon. And when it ends, we need to be ready for what's next. I believe that we need to be prepared. However, we need always in Palestine, as always, our education is emergency, resistance, flexible kind of education. We need to talk about this kind of alternative education quickly, and this I think needs a lot of effort. Institutions efforts, NGOs, international and organizations effort. We need a specific type of education which is resilient, resistant, which is flexible, because at every crisis we lose. Let's create an infrastructure to use. We have been accustomed to crises as a nation. The next. Yeah, very quickly, yes. This is the heart pain, Dr. Rifat Al-Arair. Dr. Rifat Al-Arair, I have hosted him in Abdel Mohsen Qattan Institution 6 years ago. He was a very nice teacher for student. Dr. Al-Arair is one of the elitists who came to Gaza. He changed the mentality. When I take everything as is without accepting how I can have critical thinking, how can I think about peace, resistance, but in a different manner, not the traditional way. Let's not let's look at what I have and just do it. No, don't take things at face value. Think, criticize, doubt. Dr. Ayman Al-Arair, apologies, Ayman, it's because of your name. Rifat Al-Arair, apologies. Dr. Rifat Al-Arair, when I'm going to talk about Dr. Rifat Al-Arair, I don't want to forget that Dr. Kaya, because he was his brother was also my colleague. It's a very great family. Dr. Kaya, Dr. Sana, Dr. Muhammad Shbeir, all those are very important people. When I asked the Palestinian Observatory, they said 200 academicians have been killed. Why? Wherever, if you noticed, even in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, when you say the elite of the academicians are being killed, our people are targeted, especially the ones in education, and this is important. Why am I saying that education is targeted? Muhammad Salaime, 14, 15 years. He's in ninth grade. In the exchange deal a month ago, do you know that his father was taking him to school? The occupation have issued a decision that they should not go to school because their procedures are not yet finished. This is a systematic program against education in Palestine. We need to be smart about how to face these strikes or this kind of oppression against us. We need this is a systematic plan to create an illiterate nation in Gaza. We need to be more aware and conscious. Next slide, because we'll talk about the solutions. Less than 1 minute, Hiyam. Can I go to the solution? Go back. What do I see? Give me the next slide so to talk about the solutions. There are individual efforts which will stop you. Me and you, yes, we don't have an agreement, a previous agreement. However, we both have brought Tariq Annabi's photo. Why? This is one of the important efforts in volunteering, in a desire to provide education. This young woman is a teacher. All of them used to be in teachers. They went to shelters. They never forget that they are teachers and they have a message and they can do something. That's why each one is capable of doing something under the current circumstances and the obstacles. They do whatever they can. We have high level of awareness. This woman have stopped me in the media. She was shouting and she said, I took the books and the notebooks with me, and I will not stop teaching my children because we will teach them at any circumstances. We are calling for the rights to education. Next slide. Here we are talking about individual efforts. Like, I also was stopped by this initiative, Tamer Anwar. He's Egyptian. He's doing something called School Online for the Palestinian people. There are about 500 volunteers who work in this initiative. I have communicated with him because I'm interested in electronic education and in the platforms, and we are trying to do something similar because today, whether you like it or not, electronic education is the reality you need to use. We need this kind of education more than others. Why? Because of our circumstances, because of war. But the infrastructure as well in Gaza is not ready for traditional education after the war. After we go back to our country, the infrastructure is the first thing which we need to start working on, whether institutions, with donors. To what level I can connect the internet. We still have the second generation of the internet. By the way, even Israel itself and Gaza is not allowing us to go beyond that. They are not giving us our rights. In the West Bank, it's the third. So the fourth and the fifth generations of the internet never reached us. This is a demand we need to work on, the governments, the ministries, everyone. Why the internet, whether you like it or not, is the next reality of education and maybe the savior. And that's why there are some teachers we need to work on. There is an infrastructure we need to prepare, new projects we need to work on so that we can create what is suitable for the next phase. The psychological situation as well we need to work on in the curricula. I need to take this into consideration. The curricula needs to be a movable kind of a mobile learning curricula. We will need to work on this because the children don't have houses, they don't have fixed places. This is a big misery, a big problem. However, we need to work on addressing and discussing how to solve this. 6,000, not 6,000, sorry, the thousands of the students from the first grade to the sixth grade at the university as well, and the secondary, how are we going to teach those? This is the big question all of us are interested in as people who are interested in education. Apologies. The last thing, the last slide, apologies. Okay, very, very, very quickly. I have presented in the slides that yes, there are other experiences like the field classes, Africa, Southern Africa, Afghanistan, all those countries have started doing such a thing. It's good to benefit from their experience. Would not have loved to see this. However, we are at the stage at which we need emergency solutions like field schools, or classes, the mobile curricula or mobile laboratories. Now we need the mobile school, not the laboratory only. And thank you very much for everyone. Apologies for being long. However, as I say, it's a very big issue. And as you noticed, I want to say more and more, education is the only way. This is what I can say. As institutions, we need to work together. We need to plan together for the next phase. However, I hope that this is going to end soon. This is the most important thing. Thank you, Hiam, for this very strong intervention and for your testimony from the field and to present not just those big challenges where the whole education sector is going through in Gaza. You have asked core questions, how the education is going to look after the war in Gaza. And as well, this dropout and the leakage because of what is happening in Gaza and because of COVID and etc. We'll have other meetings. We will be talking about these issues in next year. Thank you very much. Just because of time, Hiam, thank you. We'll go directly to listen to the UNRWA and the United Nations agency for the Palestinians, for Dabit, is the specialist of education in UNRWA to tell us about the catastrophic situation in Gaza and how the UNRWA had responded in Gaza Strip. First, you have 15 minutes. Thank you very much. I would like to remind you all that maybe you need to use the interpretation. If you want to listen to the interpretation, go press the globe, and especially if you want to speak in English, use the select the language you want.
men, women, and children in Gaza. Let me start with the first slide. If you can move to the next one, please. Just to give a general situation update, and as it keeps on increasing, unfortunately, and being updated. So this data is from early this week, so 17 December. But if you follow our website, there is an UNRWA sitrep that is issued on almost a daily, if not 2 days basis. So the situation as it is now, more than 85% of the population in Gaza are displaced, meaning they have nowhere to go to. Of these, 1.4 million are sheltering in 155 UNRWA shelters. And when we say shelters, it's mainly schools. UNRWA reported 174 incidents impacting its premises. 54 UNRWA installations were directly hit. 61 installations sustained collateral damage. And there were 18 incidents of military use of our facilities. This includes schools, but also other facilities. I will talk in other slides on the attacks on schools alone. We lost one today, actually, I checked this figure, 136 UNRWA staff members. And this should not be seen as a number. These are dear colleagues to all of us working in UNRWA and in Gaza. And among them are also education colleagues. Actually, the majority of them are education colleagues. On 71 day of the hostility, we have close to 19,000 Palestinians that were killed. 70% of those are women and children, and the number of injured is more than 50,000. There is nowhere safe in Gaza. Even IDPs or internally displaced persons in our shelters, UNRWA recorded 297 that were killed and at least over 1,000 injured. There has been a clear failure in protecting the lives of the children. Children have been killed in unprecedented numbers in a very short period of time. And also, one should not forget that the population in Gaza are mostly refugees. They're refugees from 1948. They have been under a sea, air, and land blockade for 16 years now. And they have witnessed 4 wars since 2008. So this comes on top of everything else. The next slide, please. So these are pictures. You can see children in our shelters, mainly in schools. And one could think that these children should be enjoying their school day. They should be enjoying their school meal. They should be doing activities with other children, preparing homework, coming fresh in the next morning. Unfortunately, these children are feeling cold, hungry, and in despair, sheltering in their own schools. The next slide, please. And you can see it's a school with a blackboard and a newborn baby sheltering there. So these are the images that we're unfortunately seeing now in our schools in Gaza. The next slide, please. This is from September 2023. So basically just before this crisis, just to give you, UNRWA is a direct service provider. So we are a UN agency, but we run schools. So in Gaza, we run 288 schools in 183 school buildings. So these school buildings are running on double or triple shift, meaning that before the crisis, we were in shortage of spaces for students. We also have 2 vocational training centers. We have close to 300,000 Palestinian refugee children enrolled in our schools and VTCs. And we have a teaching force of close to 10,000 in Gaza. And this is the map shows the distribution of our school buildings there. The next slide, please. So As of the 8th of October, which was the Sunday, basically, the education of the 300,000 Palestine refugees and also all children in Gaza, which my colleague Fadi will speak about more, has been disrupted. In terms of attacks on schools, UNRWA recorded, and this data again is from 17 December, and unfortunately it keeps on changing, 93 UNRWA schools and VTCs suffered damages, 46 were directly impacted, and 47 suffered collateral damage. We expect the number actually to be higher than this, but unfortunately, due to no movement and the war is still ongoing, we are not able to verify and assess appropriately. And as I mentioned, of our colleagues that lost their lives, the majority are education staff. We have close to 10,000 teachers in Gaza, but at the moment, UNRWA is not able to fully account for their whereabouts at this stage. The next slide, please. And just here to mention, like in speaking with our Chief of Education, Mr. Farid Abu Adra from Gaza, and I would like to quote his words here, and he tried to join us also in this webinar, but it's not easy for them in Gaza at the moment. But I promise that I will share with you what he told us. He basically said that there's no space in Gaza, not to mention a safe space. There's no water, no food, supermarkets, shops, totally empty. Diseases are spreading. Our schools are used as shelters. No school furniture left. So if we want to reopen the schools, there's no school furniture. There are no textbooks. And this is the situation as it is now. And in such a situation, and we're all education and emergency practitioners and followers here, we usually say that education brings hope. Education brings a sense of normalcy. Education contributes to psychosocial well-being. But we have to stand in the context of Gaza in front of this concept. And unfortunately, we're not able to provide this at this stage. And this is something that I will speak about as I go, because UNRWA has in place an education and emergency approach. It was developed as part of its Syria response in 2011, 2012, was used in Gaza in 2014, was even adapted to the COVID crisis. And our approach is basically that it's a three-phased approach. It starts with the provision of mental health and psychosocial support. Then we move into non-formal learning. And then basically we move into reintegration of children back to school. And this approach is done basically to support the readiness of the children to be able back to schools, but also the readiness of the system to be able to absorb them and welcome them back. The next slide, please. So in the context of Gaza, we had to unpack this approach and see, like, for example, for phase 1, MHPSS, we had to outline what are the preconditions and assumptions and to enable us to move and implement our education and emergency response. So when we speak about MHPSS, we are supposed to do a rapid needs assessment, to provide a basic MHPSS to education and parents, to provide some risk education, trauma support, recreational and PSS kits and recreational activities in temporary safe spaces. But unfortunately, we're not able to do this yet. And we had to think of a phase 0, because for this to happen, we need to have humanitarian access. We need to be able to provide recreational kits. We need to be able to enter basic supplies into Gaza. We need to have a ceasefire. We need to have safe spaces in which we can offer these activities. We need also to look at partners' capacity, because when we're talking about MHPSS and referrals, it is challenging now in the context of Gaza. The next slide, please. So what we're currently providing, and we started calling it phase 0 because we cannot implement phase 1 at this stage, is with the capacity of our school counselors that are there, and they've been working for more than 71 days non-stop providing psychosocial support, they themselves are displaced. They themselves have lost family members, and they themselves have lost their properties. But still, they are implementing some activities as much as they can with no resources in the shelters, in the overcrowded shelters, to provide some recreational activities for children, some awareness on explosive ordnance. They're providing support to other staff, and they're, as much as they can, identify and address child protection cases and implementing recreational activities. The next slide, please. Phase 2 is after we have implemented recreational activities. In theory, we should be moving into some sort of learning, and we call it non-formal education because it's not the full grade curriculum that children will be going back to once they go back to school, but it's more getting them ready to restart formal education through open-ended exercises, educational games, worksheets. But also for this phase to be able to start, we said that we need to have a ceasefire in place. We need to have safe movement. Education centers can be partially used as safe and secure temporary learning spaces, as we expect that the schools will continue to be used as shelters. We can set up more temporary learning spaces in the vicinity of the shelters, maybe, and there are enough teachers and counselors to provide the temporary learning, and we can enter these supplies into Gaza. The next slide, please. And phase 3 is basically the reintegration back into education, catch-up programs, back-to-school kits. But again, we need to be able to say that we have enough educational spaces available in Gaza, that there are shelter solutions to accommodate the people that are now sheltering in our schools. We are able to rehab the schools. We are able to have furniture back into Gaza. And the number of teachers and counselors are enough to run up the education system. However, what we should remember here is that without a ceasefire, we could not resume this, we could not implement this plan. And there is a real concern that children in Gaza will be out of formal education for years if a ceasefire does not take place as soon as possible, and if the siege on Gaza and the blockade is not lifted to allow for the goods and supplies to enter. Education does not happen in a vacuum. So unless there are basic services that are available for us to be able to set up, for example, the temporary learning spaces such as wash facilities, the health system, food, shelter solutions, we will not be able to implement all these plans. Next slide, please. And I think with this, I will end here, and I will remain available in case of any questions.
Thank you very much. شكرا كتير يا فروس.
Thank you very much for this focus and spotlight of the difficult situation of Gaza and the education. You have ended with a very important recommendation, which is to guarantee the right of education and to guarantee this right. And we need to have ceasefire. We need to have stop the war. We need to lift the siege in Gaza, around Gaza, so that we can support what is left of the sector of education in Gaza Strip. Thank you for what you've said. Again, now let's move to the International Alliance for Educational Protection from attacks, specifically what my colleague Frost had mentioned in regard to Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack. She had mentioned sabotage, which happened and demolished Ms. Abouline. She's the consultant of advocacy and policies in the GCPEA. We'd like you to talk about this issue, the right to education in Gaza Strip. The floor is yours.
in Gaza today is critical, with dire impact on the right to education of children. So while colleagues have covered the recent attacks on education in 2023, I'd like to take a look back at how Palestine has been experiencing a systematic pattern of attacks on education since at least 2009, when it was first profiled in our flagship report, Education Under Attack 2014, reporting on attacks on education around the world from 2009 to 2013. To really show the systematic pattern of attacks on education taking place over the last couple of years. Next slide, please. So according to this first report, Education Under Attack 2014, hundreds of incidents of attacks on education, including killing and injury of students and teachers and damage to schools during fighting, were documented in Israel-Palestine between 2009 and 2012 by the UN. An ongoing back-and-forth pattern of Palestinian rocket launches and Israeli artillery fire and airstrikes damaged schools primarily in Gaza, but also in Israel. For instance, during Operation Cast Lead, at least 280 schools out of 641 in Gaza were reportedly damaged and another 18 destroyed. Next slide, please. Between 2014 and 2017, in Gaza still, airstrikes and mortar shells damaged or destroyed hundreds of Palestinian schools and universities, most of them in 2014. Several Israeli schools and buses transporting Israeli students were also damaged. Multiple parties used dozens of schools and universities as bases for weapons storage or for military training in the West Bank and Gaza. And the overall level of reported attacks on schools was higher than in the period covered in our previous reports. Next slide, please. According to this next report, Education Under Attack 2020, reported attacks on education continue to occur frequently between 2017 and 2019. Conflict and occupation continue to pose serious challenges to children's access to safe and quality education across the Gaza Strip, affecting 500,000 students' access to adequate education through unpaid teacher salary, lack of school budget, and double or triple shifting of schools. In Gaza, Israeli airstrikes and Palestinian rockets reportedly damaged over 35 schools between those years. Next slide, please. Lastly, according to our latest report, Education Under Attack 2022, over 420 attacks on or interferences to education occurred in Palestine in 2020 and 2021. Attacks peaked in May 2021 when bombardments affected over 219 kindergarten, schools, and higher education facilities in Gaza. Next slide, please. Our next report, Education Under Attack 2024, will be published next year in May. And so far, what I can share with you is that GCPA has collected over 295 attacks on education in 2022 alone. Many attacks on schools involve the use of explosive weapons, and the military use of schools as well as attacks on higher education also continued in those years. Dozens of schools were also under threat of demolition by the Israeli authorities in the West Bank in 2022, and there were around 145 incidents involving Israeli security forces firing tear gas, rubber bullets, or live ammunition at or near education facilities in the West Bank and Gaza. And of course, as we have just heard today from other colleagues, the attacks continued in 2023 with a peak in May and then since October and November of this year, which I will not cover in my presentation. These attacks must stop. Schools and universities are critical to social and economic development and a functioning society. Attacks on education cause immediate loss of life and destruction, but also have other lasting consequences. Long-term mental and psychosocial effects and damage to facilities mean some students may never resume their studies, for example. So what can be done to protect education from attack? Next slide, please. Every individual's right to education is recognized under international human rights law, with children being important beneficiaries of this right. However, the right to education means little if the students cannot safely attend school or university. And that is precisely why international humanitarian law recognizes the importance of providing education to children during armed conflict. offering specific protection to children and acknowledging that education facilities are ordinary civilian objects not to be targeted unless they have been turned into military objectives. Despite this broad international law requiring parties to armed conflict to spare civilians as much as possible from the hazards of war, there are certain gaps in the law. For instance, the lack of explicit standards or norms protecting schools and universities from use in support of the military effort means that fighting forces often make use of such education institutions for various purposes, such as bases, barracks, or firing positions. This use can have significant negative consequences, such as students dropping out and retaliatory attacks that can cause the death of students and teachers. Military forces or non-state armed groups sometimes only partially occupy a school, while students continue to attend and educators continue to teach, putting them at increased risk of child recruitment and sexual violence. The Safe Schools Declaration and its guidelines to protect schools and universities from military use during armed conflict constitute a useful reference document in relation to the protection and continuity of education during armed conflict. The Safe Schools Declaration is a political instrument that was launched in Oslo in 2015 that highlights the broad impact of armed conflict on education and outlines a set of commitments to strengthen the protection of education and ensure its continuity during the conflict. The declaration describes the immediate and long-term consequences of attacks on education and the military use of schools and universities for students, teachers, and the whole communities living in these situations. And it compares them with the positive and protective role that education can play during conflict, as we have just heard from other panelists, giving a sense of routine and calm to the students that can continue to attend. To date, 118 states have endorsed the declaration, representing more than half of all the UN member states, including 2/3 of the UN Security Council, and of course, including Palestine as well. The declaration aims to improve the protection of education in situations of armed conflict by encouraging parties to change their behavior in practice, namely encouraging armed parties to refrain from using schools or universities for military purposes. Ensuring education facilities do not become military objectives and therefore a legitimate target of attacks by opposing forces goes a long way in ensuring the safety of students and education personnel and preserving the civilian character of schools and their corresponding protection from attack. Next slide, please. The declaration sets out a number of concrete commitments to protect education from attack in conflict, including, for instance, the first one of these is the implementation of the guidelines that I just mentioned, guidelines for protecting schools and universities from the military use during armed conflict, and encouraging parties to conflict to integrate them into national policies and operational frameworks. The guidelines propose a set of actions that parties to the conflict can take to reduce the military use of schools, but also to mitigate and reduce the impact that this practice can have on the students and teachers. Other commitments include to collect, analyze, and disseminate reliable data of attacks on education, which are so critical for response planning, to investigate reports of attacks on education and prosecute the perpetrators where feasible, to provide assistance to the victim of these attacks, to develop and promote conflict-sensitive approaches to education, to ensure the continuity of education during armed conflicts, to support the work of the UN on this agenda, and lastly, for states to also meet regularly to review the progress made on this agenda. Next slide, please. I also just wanted to highlight here a couple of examples of good practice in implementing the declaration to really showcase the real impact that it can have on the ground. So while countries decide for themselves how to implement the declaration, a number have already started to take concrete steps to implement some of these commitments that I just mentioned. So for example, here I've listed on the screen, Canada, Denmark, Ecuador, New Zealand, and Switzerland have updated their military manuals to include explicit protection for schools for military use, while the United Kingdom and Norway have also updated their military policies to reflect these commitments. In Mali, the government has established a national committee to oversee the implementation of the declaration, and then subsequently established 9 regional and 2 local committees to really have this holistic approach to implementation throughout the country. Since then, capacity building and training of stakeholders, especially in the military Ministry of Defense, have led to a real change on the ground by creating this change in mentality from the armed forces and encouraging them not to use schools, but instead to use prefabricated military buildings that they have created. In August 2018, the Palestinian Ministry of Education, with the support of civil society, developed an action plan also on the implementation of the declaration. Overall, GCPA found that the use of military use of schools and universities had declined by more than half between 2015 and 2020 among the earlier endorsers of the declaration where we had previously reported military use. The UN Department of Peacekeeping Operations also developed the child protection policies that strengthen the policy of banning the use of education facilities by peacekeepers, and notes that the peacekeepers have an obligation to promote and adhere to the guidelines. And since 2017, GCPA has not identified any report of military use of schools or universities by the UN peacekeepers. So we really see that in just 8 years since the establishment of this declaration in 2015, we can really see the impact on the ground the declaration is having to protect students, teachers, schools, and universities during armed conflict. Of course, these changes require as well a degree of political commitment and funding, which is not always a guarantee, and that's part of the issue. GCPA supports endorsing states to implement the declaration through the organizations of webinars, workshops, and trainings on the Safe Schools Declaration as part of the activities of the state-led implementation network. This network is an initiative led by the government of Norway that aims to support the implementation of the declaration by facilitating experience sharing and good practice in these kind of spaces. So for instance, we just held a workshop 2 weeks ago, actually, in Senegal for the countries of West and Central Africa on implementing the declaration. Next slide, please. I would like to finish by sharing a couple of recommendations from GCPA regarding the current violence and attacks against schools and universities. So we call on all parties to respect the civilian character of schools and immediately cease attacks on and threats of attacks as well against schools, students, and teachers. We call on all parties to refrain from using schools and universities for military purposes, which is in line with the UN Security Council Resolution 2601, as well as the Safe Schools Declaration, and to take steps to implement the guidelines that I've been mentioning. We call on all parties to immediately evacuate the schools and universities being occupied for military purposes, and to prioritize the rebuilding and rehabilitation of damaged or destroyed schools and universities to ensure that there will not be an impact in the long term. Next slide, please. Lastly, all parties should avoid the use of explosive weapons, of course, with wide area effects in populated areas, and especially including near schools or universities or along their routes. We encourage the government of Palestine to respect its commitments under the Safe Schools Declaration. And
Excuse me, Apolline?
Yes?
Excuse me, can you go slower just for the interpreter to be able to catch what you're saying?
Of course.
Please, thank you so much.
My apologies.
No
We
worries.
encourage the government of Palestine to respect its commitment under the Safe Schools Declaration, and we call on the government of Israel to endorse and implement the declaration to keep students, teachers, and schools safe. And lastly, we call for accountability and redress for attacks on education, including by investigating allegations of violations of applicable national and international law, and duly prosecuting perpetrators and continuing to provide assistance to the victim of these attacks. Thank you so much.
شكرا جزيلا أبولين على هاي
Thank you very much, Apolline, for these points about the declaration about protecting the right to education under attacks, and I'd like to thank you for sharing how this declaration was implemented on the ground, and the recommendations. Actually, they are very important, especially concerning the accountability and about protecting schools and universities from destruction and attacks. So thank you, Apolline. And now let us move to, before we move to Fadi, I'd like to thank all the attendees for keeping raising your questions and sending your questions in the chat box. And please go ahead and send us any question during the session, and we would like to try to answer all of them at the end of the webinar. And of course, if we don't have enough time to answer all of these questions, we would be in contact after this webinar, because this webinar is recorded, and we would share it in Arabic and English on our website, the INE, www.ine.com. And now let's move on to Palestine again to listen to our colleague Fadi Baidoun, the coordinator of education cluster in Palestine, and he is the a leader of education in emergencies. And after listening to Fadi, we would like to try to listen again to the recorded message of Dr. from Gaza Strip, Dr. Saeed Abu Aita. And we hope that we would not face a technical problem. Fadi, the mic is yours. Thank you, Ayman.
The UN Security Council has passed only 2 years ago on protection of education from attacks during conflicts, but still it has been more than 70 days now, with schools being under attack on a daily basis in Gaza. It should make everyone angry, and it should make us even more furious that we haven't seen enough advocacy for the protection of schools and Palestinian children in Gaza. So I wanted to start my presentation on this note. It's important for me to be the one who wraps up, because I want to give a bit of a dark بصراحة situation of education in Gaza. Unfortunately, even though we have the legal frameworks, we have IHL, we have also international human rights law, we have schools, Safe Schools Declaration, and we also have the UN resolution. But still, and as of now, at least 350 schools in Gaza has been attacked. That is around 70% of all school buildings in the Strip. We're talking about majority of schools being occupied by internally displaced people. Majority of them are children. It's very important to note that this, as of 7th of October, children have not been able to access education in Gaza. We're talking about around 625,000 students who have been with no access to education, no protection, no safe place to play, and nowhere really safe to go. So, in a nutshell, if we move to the next slide, it's very important for us to put this picture in mind. We're talking about a collapsed education system in Gaza. We're talking about education being directly targeted in Gaza. We're talking about schools being hit directly, schools being used as military and for military purposes, and we're talking about IDPs being killed while sheltering in schools. As I've said, at least 350 schools have sustained damages. At least half of those schools will not be able to be used after a ceasefire takes place. So we're talking about major reconstruction needs for those schools after a ceasefire happens. During the temporary ceasefire that took place a couple of weeks ago, the education cluster and its partners were able to do a quick field assessment for 40 schools in the southern governorates of Gaza. And out of the 41 schools that we visited, all have sustained a different level of damages. So we're talking about 100% of schools visited have sustained some sort of damage, and this can be really be an indicator of how the infrastructure, the education infrastructure, has been hit during the hostilities since the 7th of October. Frost has talked a lot about also the implications of UNRWA, and I'm happy to see that our colleague Hiyam has used a lot of our data that the cluster does produce on the attacks on education. That's important also to note that on top of the numbers that our colleague Frost has mentioned, another at least 3,600 Palestinian students have been killed in the strip, and around 600 teachers. Those are numbers that have never been seen in any conflict before, in terms of damage to infrastructure, in terms of killings of civilians, including students and school staff. If we move to the next slide, please. As I've said, shelters and schools have been serving as shelters since 7th of October. Majority of schools, both in UNRWA and PA schools, have been sheltering displaced people from the north to the south of Gaza. In terms of military use of school, that's something that I hope that the Global Coalition for Protection of Education from Attacks can really capture through our reports. I want to show you here a couple of videos that has been shot by the Israeli forces themselves. So I don't know who's controlling the presentation, but I hope that we can click on the two blue links here if possible. Exactly, and the second one, please. Let's start for the first and then the second. Those are very short videos that document schools being fully bombed in Gaza. It seems that you have very slow internet. So I can move on, and if those cannot be played here, they will be shared with the group, and you can play them individually.
We can share them in the chat box, Fadi. Thank
Excellent,
you. Yeah.
excellent. So what we're witnessing mainly, بصراحة, is as I've said before, a direct attack on education. Those videos that I wanted to display here shows the Israeli forces fully damaging a couple of schools in West Bank while the soldiers are cheering for their achievement of demolishing those schools. But very important to say that even though the situation is really catastrophic, and even though the partners that we operate with had either staff being killed or offices being bombed, or they have been displaced themselves, and they're operating in a very difficult security situation, which really hinders their ability to move. Even if you want to move, fuel to cars is something very scarce. Even though we have all those constraints and limitations, we still have a glimpse of hope. And this glimpse of hope comes from those heroes on the ground, those organizations and partners who have been able to operate and support children in the last 70 days. So I put here a list of 10 partners who have been really able to support at least 80,000 children and their teachers through either provision of supplies and through activities with children, which is really most needed. Children have not been able to debrief, have not been able to play. So this kind of interventions that many of those partners are trying to implement in school shelters, I think is critical for the well-being of both children and their parents. Since we have a lot of participants here coming from different, I would say, donors and INGOs, I think it's very important to start prioritizing education. It's very important that we do and provide the resources to our partners, to your organizations in Gaza, to be able to scale up their education response. It's very important to note that the education needs are really huge in Gaza, starting from now, while we're still we're under the attacks and we're under the bombardments and airstrikes. We can still do a lot in terms of supporting the children's well-being, and we can do a lot once we have a longer-term ceasefire. I think I don't want to go through a response plan again, because what my colleague Ross has taken us through is very much what our all partners and the Ministry of Education is aligned to. We want to now support the well-being of the children, and then once we have a ceasefire, we want to ensure that we can continue education through informal education initiatives, through establishing informal settings, until we can really talk about a full recovery of the system through adequate infrastructure, rehabilitation and reconstruction, and the recruitment of adequate teachers to really fill the gap of those who have passed away. So let's move to the next slide, please. What we're facing in Palestine, and as part of the humanitarian response to the Gaza Strip mainly, is really a deep prioritization of education. We know that education activities cannot really take place as we have active war, but it's very important that we start earmarking support to education and start supporting the partners who have plans to respond after the ceasefire. So we need to have really the right operational capacities and the right funding to be able to restore education and to be able to really support children's well-being and continuity of learning as soon as the situation allows. If we can go to the next slide, please. So we need your support. First of all, others have mentioned that it's very important to keep calling for the stop of war and for a ceasefire to take place. This crisis is unprecedented. We've never seen this type of civilians being killed, infrastructure, including education infrastructure, being damaged, school furniture and shelters being used to light fires for cooking and keeping people warm. School books are also used to light fires because people have nothing else to utilize. Although Palestinians are among the most populations around the world who really appreciate education, where we have the highest enrollment rates in the region, but still people had to use education supplies, books, and furniture to stay alive and to be able to cook. all what we planned for before as part of education emergencies in the country has never been able to see in any of our scenarios this kind of situation where the whole education system has collapsed and the majority of people in Gaza have been displaced. We need to really continue our advocacy, first of all, to continue to really have a ceasefire and to the stop of the war. We need to continue our advocacy. If we go to the next slide, please, to ensure education is funded, to ensure that we have operational partners on the ground, and to really support the response that is now ongoing and will take place at a larger scale once we have an immediate ceasefire. We need your support in ensuring that schools, the resolution 2601 and the Safe School Declaration is respected, international humanitarian law is respected, and schools and children and school staff are really protected in this conflict. We need your help. Please keep advocating for this. Please keep Gaza in your minds, and let's all hope and pray for a ceasefire as soon as possible. Over to you, Ayman.
شكرا جزيلا يا فادي على هاي
Thank you very much, Fadi, for your presentation, which is very hard and touching. And I'd like to add my voice to you and to the international community to the importance of ceasefire and to preserve lives or the still lives and to protect the education sector, which is still going on and which should be going on, and that there should be an international intervention to protect them and to have accountability for those who are violating the right to education. And of course, this crisis, as you just mentioned, Fadi, that this is an unprecedented crisis according to the number, to the rate of destruction and loss in lives. And we know that the educational needs are very high and in Gaza, and the response should be unprecedented too because of the amount of destruction there. Maybe later we would speak about the form of education that should be targeted to Palestinians in Gaza Strip. So we would continue in these discussions and these presentations and suggesting recommendations and what we can do. But now let's try to listen again to Dr. Saeed Abu Aita and his recorded message that we tried to listen to in the beginning of the webinar. I hope it works now. By the name of God, our respectful presenters in INI and attendees, talking to you from Gaza Strip, this afflicted strip which was attacked fiercely, that to the degree that all buildings are destroyed. I'd like to talk to you with pain for our people here in Palestine because of the prolonged besiege, while thousands or hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are suffering now. I'm talking to you here today about the future of education, if I can say so, in Gaza Strip and the reality of education. And I'd like to be honest here. If I say, if there were books or theories put for education, I believe in our special circumstances, we need for new books to be written for Gaza Strip and to invent new methods to guarantee the continuity of education, because hundreds of schools were destroyed and the rest of them are occupied by displaced people for we don't know how long time. We know that the nature of our people is that they are passionate about education, despite their poverty and despite of their hard circumstances, but they are looking forward to getting education. But unfortunately now there are no institutes, no universities, no schools. Most of the facilities were destroyed completely or partially. Even the schools under the protection of the UN, they were attacked and destroyed. And now I can't describe. There are no words that I can use to describe the future of education. Even online, I don't believe that it works. Face-to-face education, of course, there has no space for it. But there is a need for the continuity of education, but I don't know how. I don't know what to do. Because you know that Gaza always used to invent means of life and always tried to rise from the ashes and to lead life. But this fierce war, I don't know after this fierce war how the future of education would be. Even online education that was useful after the pandemic. It was useful till for a short period of time, but now after the large destruction of the infrastructure, especially in the communication structure, I don't believe that it works. And you know that the communications is cut, so I don't know how long the online education can work. I don't believe that we can provide anything needed for online education. So I call you from Gaza Strip, where I live now, in these hard times, to try to think and to invent new methods. Gaza was destined to be under this fierce war because it always inventing new things for the world. So what I want to say actually is very simple part of the reality that we are witnessing here. I hope that I managed to convey the image of Gaza, but I can promise that we are going to be stronger than before, and we don't fear death. We love life, and we look for the future, and we hope that by your support that we can find a way to restore education sector and to get our education back to their schools. I'm sorry to take much time, but I might not be able actually to speak clearly at some point, but this is what I wanted to convey to you in a few words. And as I just mentioned, that we live in Gaza, long live education and long live those learners, because they are oppressed and they deserve life and they deserve education. And God is victorious over his affairs.
This was Dr. Said Abu Aita. He's a member of the interagency network of Gaza Strip. And he had mentioned a number of issues, one of which is we need to think outside the box to be responding to the situation in Gaza. And that's why, because we have so many demolished and sabotaged schools and educational infrastructures, and we need to protect education from the attacks. What is left is about 20 minutes before we end the session. And this is why I will introduce now my colleague Miriam to manage the Q&A session. We have so many questions. I would like to thank all the colleagues who have always posed questions, who have important topics, and those are important to continue discussing. If it's possible to stop the sharing the presentation, awesome. And now I call Hiam, Pauline, if you're still with us, Fadi as well, to open your video cameras, and I would request my colleague Miriam to run and facilitate this session. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much, Ayman. May God give everyone all the due help. I will ask those questions in Arabic, and if the question was asked in English, if this was suitable for everyone. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank whomever have posed question, whether in the Q&A or in the chat. Actually, there are a number of questions which we'll be discussing, because we might be able to find answers to some other questions. I don't think that they are related to education rights. We have written those, noted them, but as a network, we might have an answer, we might not. To those, we hope for peace for everyone, and for all the children to have the ability to access education and the right to education. Apologies if there are some questions which are not going to be asked. Nonetheless, if we still have time at the end, we will ask them. First of all, the first question is Ross from Muna Yunus. The question is,
answer and then we alternate.
It depends on how many questions, but I'm happy to do
There
it.
are
If
three
there
for
are too
you.
many questions, maybe we do one by one. It's easier.
Okay, let's go. Let's do that. Thank you.
On the duration of the phases, this is something that we keep on being asked. We've never tagged a time frame for it because, like I said, the whole concept was developed based on the readiness of the children and the readiness of the system. So it could vary depending on the context. So when schools are ready, it might take longer times in certain locations. Even in Syria, there was not a one-size-fits-all response. It differed based on the context on the ground, like the readiness of the education system, but at the same time, the readiness of the children to be able to go back into learning. So I wouldn't spend a lot of time on trying to say like this should be 3 months or this should be 4 months. It really depends on the actual context. And I hope I answered your question.
There's another question from Muna. Perhaps I can ask it to, and then if Muna has any additional need for clarification, we can go. How can we, experts in EIE and MHPSS, by EIE, it's Education in Emergencies, MHPSS, for those listening to us, it's mental health and psychosocial support, helped and engage in phase 0. Is there any ongoing activity? Might seem a too early question, but we need to start one day, as it seems a prolonged crisis.
On this one, like I mentioned, we're relying a lot on human capacity, because in the absence of being able to get any resources into Gaza, a lot of activities are happening with the facilitation of the counselors on the ground, a lot also on community-based initiatives, people sheltering in the shelter. You have some organizations that have experience in doing recreational activities. They start to do something for the children. So I think at this stage, we need to all, as much as we can, advocate for having a ceasefire to be able to do more. And we need to advocate for also lifting the blockade on Gaza, because even if there is a ceasefire and we're not able to enter with the basic supplies, any education response will take years, like I said. Thank you.
Thank you. Muna, if you would like to add anything, please either mention it in the chat or add a question, and we're happy to answer that. Meanwhile, there are wishes from participants as well. It's about wondering how INE and partners might have to come up with a new program, perhaps, or if there is regarding preparedness, it would be important how, for example, INE could, in collaboration with UNRWA, look at phase 0. And it seems like participants are happy to discuss further. So would you like to take it right now, or perhaps at a later stage in a different situation or opportunity?
No, brilliant. We're always looking for resources. We have looked and we realized, and we thank Aini for creating a page at the beginning of the crisis in which you shared resources, whether it's for learning or whether it's for MHPs. And we have looked at those. We have our own resources also developed through the various emergencies that we had to respond to, that we are utilizing, and we have our staff, of course, trained on this. So in this case, like, as we don't have time for training, we don't have a lot of resources to enter Gaza, like any quick tips or resources available, we will be there will be useful for us as well. Thank you.
Thank you. First, now a question to Fadi, and it's going to be in Arabic. And if Fadi doesn't have an answer, perhaps other panelists would like to step in as well.
The question is from Suhair Badarna. What are the plans of the international institutions which work on the child's rights to education in all circumstances to protect the children? The institutions because you know, and you see every day the bombardment and the sabotage which is happening to the schools. What are the plans or the role of the international organizations? Thank you, Mariam. Thank you, Suhair, for this question. Can you hear me?
Yes, now.
Yes. First of all, I would like to stress what I have said in my presentation. The information is provided if you're talking about all the schools and the educational centers which have been violated. We have the information, we have the data, we have the photos, the videos, everything available. But to be honest, with all transparency in this group, I need to say the support and the advocacy in the direction of of stopping those violations against education in Gaza Strip is not enough. From the partners, from the international organizations, the UN agencies, the advocacy was weak in regard to the right of education to the children of Gaza and to stop the Israelis' violations of those rights in Gaza Strip. And I need to be honest about stressing this. What I said at the beginning is that we call for everyone, let's have loud voices first to stop the aggression completely, and second, to stop the violations specifically which are happening against the educational institutions and education. The institutions working in Palestine are trying to do whatever they can as a cluster responsible for the coordination amongst everyone. We have our own plans in regard to the psychosocial support of the children. We have also plans which we have prepared for the scenarios. This is in regard to how we can go back to education after the ceasefire. We start with small steps because, as you see, every year you are talking about the whole catastrophe in the educational sector. And first, the teachers, the students need to feel that the life is back to normal before we talk about education. Here you're talking about a full infrastructure which was demolished. We have so many things we need to do. We are planning, first of all, and on the ground, we started with creativity, recreational activities to support the children. Internationally, I would say there is a weak support for the educational sector, and the institutions don't have a lot of interest in this. The AIE and other international organizations so far did not communicate with us, and they did not talk about how they can support the educational sector with financial support as well as technical. And sometimes you don't need to send money, just like technical support with the creative out-of-the-box initiatives. This would be important in Gaza Strip as well. Thank you for the question. And in case any organization wants to help and support, you have my email. You can share my email with everyone. I would like to hear from you. We receive any support, any question, even if it was just an idea of support, would receive this happily. Thank you, Mr. Fadi.
More questions or comments coming in the chat. We're monitoring that, so don't worry, we're going to tackle those points. a question to Apolline. Mainly, like if we combine more than one question, is about mechanisms that exist to hold whoever attacks schools accountable, if I may frame it like that.
Seems Apolline is not with us anymore.
Perhaps for other panelists, if they know, perhaps from UNRWA, if Hayam already knows, if Fadi, if you have any feedback about or knowledge about mechanisms that are in place just to hold people accountable, whoever attacks or uses schools for anything except education.
يعني if you allow me, أنا I don't want to be political, it's not my role, but it's important to say that there are different global and UN mechanisms to hold perpetrators accountable. Thus, those mechanisms, for them to be activated, they need the right political will that I think we lack at the international arena to move them forward. So I want to stop at this point بصراحة.
Sure, no worries at all. It's just that we're reflecting what has been shared in the chat and in the Q&A. One more question. Okay, Frost, would you like to go?
No, maybe just to
Go
add
ahead.
that from UNRWA perspective, although we are a service provider, so we run schools, but at the same time, we are a UN agency. So our premises in Gaza, be it health clinics, be it schools, they are UN premises and they should be protected under international law. So definitely whoever is committing attacks against UN facilities need to be held accountable at one point. Thank you.
Thank you. Now questions to all panelists. Most of the speakers are stressing on MHPSS, and this is very logic, and they say first thing first. How can all those interested in providing a helping hand collaborate and coordinate their work? It's about collaboration and coordination.
I can come on this. The education cluster is the umbrella for coordinating every education-related any activity during and post-conflict. So if any of the agencies or partners here who are not member of the cluster in Palestine, but still feel that they can contribute to the response, please feel free to contact me and make sure that you're part of the thinking, you're part of the planning, and you're part of the response, because we are mainly the lead in ensuring coordination among the different stakeholders.
Thank you, Fadi. And on this, there was a comment or a question. While schools are all damaged, do you think online/distance learning will be considered as an option after the war ends? It was covered in a way or another in the presentation, yet if you would like to elaborate. If you, Hiyam, if you would like to answer this question.
Thank you very much. I would like to answer first about the question which is related to what are the mechanisms and the methods which we can use to protect the child's education and support education. First of all, I would like to ask more. What is the support provided today to support the life of children? First of all, we need to support the life of children. We need to protect the life, their presence, their existence. Without the presence of the children, there's no education. What are you talking about? If the hundreds of students or children are dying daily, this is a catastrophe, a big one. We need to see what are the efforts which we can do first to guarantee the life of the children. Second, in regard to the mobile learning and distance learning, the experience, I would say, is not easy. We have tried it. However, sometimes you go, because you know this is difficult to apply, but you don't have other choices. As I said, this is the direction of education around the world, distance learning. Even we have seen that this education has privileges and it's useful, and it's not something which you can build overnight. You need to do this at a number of doses, like step by step, gradually, because We need to have an at the time of the COVID, there was an infrastructure we could accommodate that. Now we can reach internet. We need to have access to the internet today as well. And then this is our right. And you cannot say that we need education online without the access to internet. We need to work on legislations first. We need to get the rights, the basic rights. One of the rights is the communication right. And to be connected to the rest of the world. The occupation have banned us from, deprived us from this. You need this infrastructure before you talk about education. Our nation is capable of adapting, loves life, knows that the future is in education. That's why what we need is the tools, your support, and the preparedness of the youth is more than you think. Whether at the university, whether at the mothers, everyone is ready. Everyone wants to learn. Not now in Gaza, it's not a problem of whether we have online or not, but what we need is the people, that the support of the organizations through the provision of the infrastructure to prepare for that. Thank you. Thank you, Hiyam. Is there anyone else from amongst the panelists who would like to say something here?
From the panelists, would you like to answer this?
سؤال تاني.
Sure. So there's Noel from a participant is asking, this war has also affected the people from Israel. What are the data of the victims from Israel?
There are sources for this data, but I don't think that this forum needs to address it because no, we're talking about Gaza in particular. But the UN has been producing data and reports on the impact on both sides that our colleague here can refer to.
Okay, thank you so much. One last question, which is also related to children or education within Gaza and outside. It's how does this conflict influence education outside of Gaza? For example, students of the Palestinian diaspora who suffer from various or vicarious trauma. As a public health advisor that designs preventive interventions on mental health for students, I see that this is playing a big role in mental health issues the last 3 months. Frost, would you like to answer this question?
Yes, very true. And we've been noticing this in all our field of operations, the impact on the psychosocial well-being of Palestine refugee children in Jordan or in Lebanon or in other situations, because unfortunately, this brings back the trauma of 1948. This refugee community comes from 1948. So this is basically repeating the trauma, the collective trauma for them in a different images. So yes, there is of course this impact on the psychosocial well-being that is beyond even only the children in Gaza, but the children in the region and beyond. I can speak about the children in the region because this is where we operate. We operate in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and in the West Bank. We have also another office which is also facing other challenging times. So yes, definitely, we're noticing this impact.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to comment on this? هيام تفضلي.
أنا بدي أحكي إحنا محتاجين لمصطلح
I would like to
جديد.
say we need to have a new term coined. Now we have been talking about aftershock or the post-traumatic disorder. Now we need something else because we live the trauma. we don't have enough time as an institution to work on treating this and addressing it. I mean, we don't have the time to work on these traumas, and then all what we've done is going to be ended by a new war, like in the 21st and 22nd, 23rd, every day they are exposed to trauma. So our normal activities are not the thing which we can use. I don't have a name for this, but there's something we need to add. This is a different case which we cannot apply the recurrent traumas on. This kind of war was very tense. However, until this moment, the children were not awakened from their first in 2008, 2014. You cannot count. I think we need this post-traumatic disorder, or what the activities which we are doing for this are, yes, good for temporary as a temporary solutions, but the effect is deep. Here for this in this regard. I believe we need to look at, we have pamphlets, references maybe, which are talking about after the trauma, and for specific children or vice versa, when it's a recurrent trauma or a long term, it's dealt with in a different manner. What you're saying is, yes, is valid, and maybe we need to work on this more, maybe. Or vicarious trauma. And we need to stop because we already have went beyond the time. Do you have anyone who would like to ask a question, or do we stop here? Ayman, would you like to ask or to take back the lead? Thank you very much, Miriam, for facilitating this session of Q&A. Thank you for all the participants' questions and for the interaction, very active interaction in the chat, and the desire to work, to network, to work together. We will work through EIE to provide you all with provide you with the virtual recording and provide the communication means and contacting also the rest of the group. We are always expanding on this cooperation and coordination, and we will communicate with you later to talk on some of the ideas later. At the end, I would like to thank the speakers, the males, the females. Thank you, Apolline. Thank you, Hiam. Thank you, Frost. Thank you, Fadi. Thank you, Dr. Saeed, who I hope that he is well and safe in Gaza. And I would like to thank the friends from Aini, Miriam, Ola, Sahar, Asim. Thank you, Dean, for staying with us during this session. I also second and join you in this, and I say we need to continue to work to lobby towards stopping the war, the devastation in Gaza Strip, as Hiam had said. The children's presence and existence is the priority, and this means that they will have then the desire to education. And when we do this, we need also to support Gaza left of blockade, because this would help provide the right to education afterwards. As Fadi had said, in the education cluster, they are open to the partnerships as well in the INE as well. We call everyone to continue the communication through be part of the INE community of practice. We will share all the links with you later in the email, which is going to be after this session. Thank you for everyone who had spoken, as well as we would like to thank the people who were present with us today. This is going to be recorded. We will share this with you. And before I forget about this, I would like to thank the interpreters, the great interpreters who were with us, Noor and Maisa, for facilitating the communication. Thank you very much for everyone who had participated. See you soon. All solidarity and love for everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Ayman. Thank you, everyone. Thank you as well on my side. Good luck.